Good morning. The time is now 10 o'clock, and we are going to start the 2026 Board of Review 2-hour meeting. Today's date is June 4th, 2026. We'll start by doing the call to order at exactly 10 o'clock a.m. We're going to do a roll call. Tim Edwards,
Here.
Bill Shadid,
Here.
Christine Huber, Chris Niggemeyer, Sam Schneider,
Here.
Kim Lukert.
Here.
Also present, Assessor Mark Brown. And I am the village clerk, Donna Ott, present. We're going to, next item on our agenda is the confirmation of appropriate Board of Review and open meeting notices. This meeting was properly noticed. I have an example of that notice that was also put into the newspaper. It's the notice that the assessment row is open for examination and open book, which happened here in the effective starting on the 7th day of May is when the books were available for public inspection. And then the notice of Board of Review 2-hour meeting was on that same notice and publication. If anybody would like to see a copy of that, it is here with me at my clerk's station here. Verification of training is the next item on our agenda. Verified training took place for this year, 2026. The members that took training are Sam Schneider and Bill Shadid. Both completed the training and provided the training materials and took the exam. In addition, I also took the training at an off-site location for the training that I received was a Train the Trainer event at a WMCA event, which is a Wisconsin Municipal Clerks Association. So 3 of us have taken the training. The affidavit of training was filed by Chief Deputy Clerk Casey Miller on today's date. Because we have filed that, we'll move on to the next item, which is going to be to select a Board of Review chairperson. So if someone would like to make a motion to select a Board of Review chairperson for the 2026 Board of Review meeting today. Okay, please turn on your microphone, lean forward and speak in your microphone when you guys are talking. And to operate the microphones, just push the button on the bottom of it. Make sure your red light is off. Speak clearly into the microphone forward because it is being recorded and we will need to have this audio available for folks at home.
I would like to nominate Sam Schneider.
I need to decline. I woke up this morning with a hearing problem and trouble understanding, so I just as soon decline.
Okay.
So that was declined, so we need to pick a chairperson. So another motion. Microphone.
I'm sorry. I nominate Kim.
Do you accept that, Kim?
I accept.
Seconded by? Okay, and then let's move on to do a selection of a Board of Review vice chairperson. We need a motion to select a vice chair.
Nominate Chris Niggemeyer.
I second.
Who seconded, please?
Kim.
Thank you. Okay, the next item is the verification of an ordinance for confidentiality of income and expense information. The Village of Germantown has this adopted confidentiality income and expense information under state law section 70.17 sub 7 sub A. Municipal code for Village of Germantown is section 1.11 sub 3. I also have that document available if anyone wishes to look over that. But we do have a verified ordinance for that confidentiality of income. Next item, the chairperson and Board of Review clerk to outline the Board of Review hearing procedures. The first item on there is the waiver policy, and item B is the telephone testimony policy. So the chairperson, if you want to talk about what outline the Board of Review hearing procedures. Yes. Here is the Chair Board of Review hearing script, and I have it turned for your page already right there.
I just read this right.
Yes, just make sure you're in the microphone and you can read out what that process is.
So this is the review of the hearing script. Clerk has a digital tape recorder in good working order and ready to start.
Yes.
Clerk, to introduce the case of the hearing for the hearing.
And there are no cases that there was no tentative objections filed by the deadline. So at this time, there are no objections.
So then we can skip the swear in all witnesses.
Yes.
All right, here's the hearing procedures. Do I have to go over that since we don't have anyone, or?
You can just give a brief outline. You don't have to, just a synopsis if we were to have someone to
Sure.
walk in. Because at this time, someone could potentially walk in and it would be up to you as a board to decide on whether or not you're going to grant them the opportunity because of a waiver.
Sure. So if we have anyone walking in, the person filing the objection will testify and present evidence first. The assessor may then ask the property owner objector, after which the Board of Review members may ask any additional questions they have for the property owner or objector. After the property owner objector testifies, any witnesses present in the support of the objector will testify. Each witness will be subject to questions from the assessor and the Board of Review members. After all witnesses for the property or objector have testified, the assessor will then present his or her case. His case in this example, the property owner objector may then ask the assessor questions followed by the Board of Review members. After the assessor testifies, any other witnesses present in support of the assessor will testify. Each witness will be subject to questions from the property owner objector and the Board of Review members. The property owner objector may respond to the assessor's testimony by presenting any other evidence, followed by additional questioning from the assessor and the Board of Review members. The assessor may then present any other evidence in support of the assessment, again, subject to questioning from the property owner objector and the Board of Review members. After all evidence has been submitted under oath, the property owner objector may make a brief summary of his or her case to the Board of Review. The assessor may follow with a brief summary of his or her case. After each summary has been presented, the taking of testimony will be closed. The Board of Review will deliberate on the testimony in an open session, either immediately following the testimony or at a later date announced.
Thank you. So the next item that we're going to move on from our agenda is the assessor's report.
All right, I'm just going to hand out a report to you guys.
Thank you. Just note for the record that the assessor has provided the board with the 2026 Board of Review outline, and Assessor Mark Brown will go over that with us.
Yeah, so this is a new report I'm trying out for this year. So any feedback when I'm done, I'd be greatly appreciated. So again, this is 2026 assessment year. The effective assessment date would be January 1st of 2026. So essentially changes made during calendar year 25 is what we're reviewing for this assessment cycle. It's not a revaluation year, so we're not updating for market conditions. We're really updating the role and maintaining it based on permits and shifts in class, splits, transfers, those sorts of things. Every year we have to estimate where we believe as the assessor our assessments are. It's considered to be the level of assessment. And so based on sales that occurred calendar year 25, and based on the makeup of our assessment role being residential tax class, commercial tax class, there's a certain percentage of value in each of those classes. I'm estimating that we're about 93%, meaning on average properties are still selling for more than the assessed values. And as you recall, we did the last revaluation in 2024. And so it's been now, 2 years since that time. And, we should probably consider doing another revaluation within the next 2 years so that our ratio doesn't get too far from current market conditions. Based on the changes to the roll, we had some new construction. And so as a residential tax class, we saw 27,131,400 in new construction. Commercial was more at 40,905,000. And subtracting out raising and removals, we had a total net new construction of 66,178,900. It's about 1.5% change due to new construction. And so that does have impacts on the village's levy limits under state law. It's not enough for them to increase their levy based on net new construction, but it is something that gets factored in. So next page is a breakdown of your tax classification. So for 26 assessment year, not including manufacturing assessed classifications, which are assessed by the state, we saw a total of $4,006,534,300. This is the first time that we have been over $4 billion. And so that's a fairly significant milestone for the village. This is about a 1.43% increase from last year's assessment roll. Again, considering new construction class shifts, we had some shifting between manufacturing. And so it always changes the value a little bit. But last year was $3,949,944. So a nice increase. And then that's just a breakdown of each of the different tax classifications. Next page goes through kind of our compliance. So as we've talked about in the past, the state will monitor every municipality, and the requirements are that the assessments must be within 10% of the state's equalized value, at least once in a 5-year period. And so every year they monitor where our assessments are at. Last year, we came in at residential, we were about 97, it was 96.9%. And so we're in compliance. We're above the 90% threshold. Commercial is another major class that was at 98.7%. And then agricultural and a combined 5, 6, and 7, which is our undeveloped, our forest, our agricultural home sites, farms. They're not a major class, so they're not considered in that compliance requirement. So really, we just have residential and commercial is the only two that are really monitored for the village. So we're in compliance. We're not going to be required to do a revaluation until the level of assessment is below 90 or above 110 for at least consecutively 4 or 5 years. The next part is kind of understanding, what are ratio studies? Not everybody understands it. And so I try to put together some information. Essentially, when we do our ratio studies, we're comparing the prior year's assessment to the calendar year sale. And so in this case, the calendar year 2025, a property sells, it's compared to what it was assessed for on the roll last year. And that gives us a ratio. And so if you take an assessed value of 190,000 and divide it by a recent sale of 200,000, that would indicate we're at 95% of a recent sale, or an estimation that we're at 95% level of assessment. We take all of those ratios, we analyze them all, and we come up with an overall aggregate ratio. And that's how I projected we're at 93%. And so this is just kind of some examples of how we look at 4 major criterias for ratio studies, the median, the mean, the average, the aggregate, PRD, and coefficient of dispersion. Coefficient of dispersion is a measurement of uniformity within your assessments. And so we always want to have uniformity in property tax assessment because it distributes the tax burden, right? So we want to ensure that our ratios are not only close to sales, but also consistently close to sales. So that's a good measurement. Statistically wise, you should be, usually in this community, anything under 15 is considered good. I like to be closer to 10 if possible. And then, you have good uniformity in your tax base. A measurement for vertical equity is called the price related differential, or we call it a PRD. And so that's a measurement to determine how close are your lower valued properties compared to your higher valued ones, so that you don't have a disproportionate influence where your higher value properties are way under assessed or over assessed relative to your your lower value properties. You want to have consistency between that class, that level of value, and that's the PRD. Next page kind of has some illustrations on that COD and PRD. Just think of it like a cluster, or other people refer to it as like a dartboard. You start throwing darts at the dartboard. You want to be close to the center all the time, right? That's a good COD. And then your PRD, you don't want to have too much variations between the height side. Next page is our ratio study. So we had 239 calendar year 2025 sales that met the criteria to be considered for ratio. They're arm's length sales, they're not family sales, duress sales, quit claim deeds, anything that isn't considered to be arm's length. It also excludes any new construction that might have been a partial last year, but then sold, because that wouldn't be a good reflection of what the assessment value is, right? So overall, we had an aggregate ratio of 88, median of 93, coefficient of dispersion was 8.23. Again, I said I like it when it's under 10. That means it's good. So we passed metrics there. Our PRD is a little bit high at 1.06. It should be between 0.98 and 1.03. And so it shows that since the revaluation, our higher value properties are tending to be a little under assessed compared to our lower value properties. So that's something that would get fixed the next reval. That trend kind of changes over time, but we'll have to keep an eye on it. Commercial only had 15 sales. Usually sales of less than 15 or even at 15 aren't typically considered statistically significant. And so, and commercial could be a whole mix of different properties and why they sold, right? And so those metrics, I don't pay as much attention, although we have to ensure that we look at, what's selling and why, and is there any reason why that's sold for a different amount. And then I showed the previous year's 2024 ratio study. We had 273 sales of residential. Aggregate ratio was closer to that 100%, being at 97. Median was 98, and our coefficient of dispersion was 4.9. Again, that was a year after a reval, and so it would be expected that those ratios are much tighter and closer. Over time, those start to become different, and so that's when you have to look at doing a reval again. Next page is kind of the overall cycle, some different metrics, some different things that we accomplished this year as part of the assessment process. So we conducted about 445 field inspections. We reviewed and values and different situations of about 820 parcels. We had 1,785 permits that we had to look through and determine whether or not they were going to be considered if they impacted value. We had 618 transfer returns. The state went through a change in how the transfer returns get set up this year. They have a new e-return system where they get electronically recorded. That went into effect in January. And so that was an interesting change in systems. We had 402 notices of changes of assessments were mailed out on Tuesday, April 21st. And as a requirement for maintenance years, notices must be mailed out at least 15 days prior to the date. So prior to board review, they're 15 days. We had open book. We had about 18 people participate through the open book process. 370 valid arm's length sales out of those 618 transfer returns that were analyzed and looked at. 44 new houses were built in calendar year 25, 12 new commercial buildings. And then as a secondary, process to the real estate role in the assessment process, we also have a monthly parking permit fee process that we, facilitate for the village, where in mobile home parks, if they're a licensed mobile home manufactured home community, you have parcels that are rented on a monthly basis, and they don't pay property tax like normal real estate parcels. They pay a monthly parking permit fee, which is based off of the tax rate of the previous year. So I won't go into it too much in details, but every December we establish what the values are of those individual parking permit accounts. And then they are distributed monthly a fee to park there. If people move out mid-year, then they stop paying taxes, which is different than an annual ad valorem tax bill you get every year, right? So then people can move in and out, and so it translates better than having a fixed real estate. Some of the deadlines and dates, again, we talked about January 1st being the statutory effective date. Notices were mailed out April 21st. I conducted an in-person open book on May 7th here at the Village Hall from 4 to 6. And then, of course, today's the board review. Next page just kind of goes through some of the board review, process and rights that property owners have, as we talked about it earlier. In order to be scheduled for a hearing today, they would have had to have filed an intent to object within 48 hours with the clerk. Could be a phone message, an email. It's really just an intent to file. And then they have within the first 2 hours of this meeting to actually file the objection form, where then we could consider to have a hearing. If they don't meet the 48 hours, of course, they would have to show good cause as why they couldn't meet that statutory requirement. And you as a board would have to determine whether they meet that good cause or not. As an assessor, I also am considered to have 48 hours notice prior to any hearing. And so if I'm not prepared to hear that, I would have to ask that we would adjourn to another date to hear that appeal. Of course, we have sworn oral testimony. They have to present market information, and then you have certain processes that you have to follow in order to listen to the appeal and make a determination based on that evidence that's presented. Provided some common terms, things we talk about, what's full value, what's an arm's length sale, what's mass appraisal. I'm not going to go through all of them, but just some helpful information on some of the major terms that we talk about through the assessment process. And most of the time, of course, we only do this once a year. And so some of it's kind of a good refresher for you to see what those terms are. And then what are the next steps? So after today, the board review, adjourns. There's no more changes to the assessment roll at that point for 2026. It would then be used to determine what tax bills are based off of come December. After this, we generally file what's called a municipal assessor's report with the state. It's called the MAR. It's kind of a balance sheet where it shows all the changes made and the reasons why. So we went up 40 million because of new construction and commercial. I report that to the Department of Revenue. They take that into consideration when they are reviewing and publishing their equalized value, which is August 15th of every year. And so it's a balance sheet. We tell them shifts in class, all sorts of things. The clerk is to file the statement of assessments with the state showing here's the final values for our community for this year. We also file a agricultural conversion form with the county to ensure that they know of any parcels that might have changed out of agricultural use into a tax class that's taxable in a different value. And actually property owners pay a conversion charge for that. Depending on how many acres are converted out, it can be pretty costly. But the reason for that is because agricultural use is not assessed at market value. It's assessed at a very nominal rate per acre, a couple $100 per acre compared to what its market value might be at 25, 30, 40, 50,000 an acre if it was assessed at a different tax class. So there is a conversion charge for that. After this, if nobody objects to the assessments, they would lose their right to appeal in further avenues. And so those are generally considered to be either an appeal to the Department of Revenue or appeal to Circuit Court. So yeah, that was our cycle. I get ready for next year and start this all over again. So, questions?
I'd just like to acknowledge how nice this new summary is. Very easy to read, very to the point. So thank you, Mark.
Good.
Any other questions regarding the materials that our assessor just went over? Okay. So the next item on the agenda, Assessor, is the review of any new laws. Are there any new laws that we should be advised of?
Yeah, so there's a couple changes this year. One that impacted us probably the most out of all of them, there was a tower exemption put into play. So as you recall, a few years ago, the state exempted personal property. Well, they did it in two phases. One, they started with machinery, tools, and patterns. If you remember that kind of went away first. And then the next part was, okay, let's get rid of the rest. And the problem with that is we had a lot of structures, buildings, fixtures, and improvements. Think of like an airplane hangar that's on a county-owned land. The hangar is owned by somebody other than the landowner. It's owned by a corporation or a person, right? Well, they used to pay personal property on that hangar, and the landowner wasn't paying taxes on that building. They were paying it through the personal property side. So when they got rid of personal property, what do we do with the structures that are really real estate, but are on somebody else's property? And so that's the whole problem with it. And so what came about is we had towers, we had hangars, we had pipelines, right? And so the towers and the lobbyists for them got an exemption for towers if it's being used for telecommunications purposes. We have situations where like US Cellular doesn't own the tower. They lease a space from a tower company. And so the tower companies got together and said, well, we don't want to be on, paying taxes. And landowners that were leasing the towers say, oh, I don't want to pay their tax bill. And so there was an exemption created for towers. So we had 2 towers that became exempt through that process. Owners had to file an exemption request form with my office to show that they were leasing it to a telecommunications company, and then I would grant them the exemption. So that was one change that was made, affected everybody in the state based on that new exemption. One other one that doesn't impact us here, but there was a recent prefabricated structure exemption. This one is an interesting one. It's anytime a prefabricated structure that was originally designed to be towed upon a highway, so essentially a mobile home, right, is exempt if it's on a licensed campground. Another result of removing personal property was we have a lot of campgrounds in the state of Wisconsin, over 400, right? And some campgrounds have 200 people that lease a space on the campsite with a mobile home that were prior on our personal property rolls, including the enclosed porch that they had attached to it, and the decks and the patios, and things that were not owned by the landowner were being assessed separately. And then when the law changed, all of that went onto the landowner's parcel. You can imagine property owner owning a campground that's worth $2 million on the real estate roll, and then in 1 year get 5 million added to that that's not owned by them. And so that became very interesting. So this prefabricated structure was a result of the Campground Association lobbying to say, hey, this isn't fair. And we believe these structures are personal property and not real property. We should make these exempt. Can't say it's a great bill because the requirements are that the property owner is to file with the assessor again by March 1st, requesting an exemption. Think of it this way. We added the 5 million to the landowner's parcel. The building owner is not getting a tax bill right now. The landowner is getting a tax bill. So the owner is to file an exemption request for something they're not getting a tax bill for. The landowner doesn't own the building that the exemption is for. They should have made it personal property, is basically what should happen. So there is some works right now that perhaps there'd be an amendment bill to make it a little cleaner to implement, because I feel like it's going to be a nightmare to implement. The other one was more the judicial privacy. I think we talked about it last year. There's a Judicial Privacy Act where members like a judge that lives in the community could have their digital footprint be confidential so that it can't be searched online. It can't be part of the assessment roll. People can't discover where they live, right? Affects very few, but that went into April last year. So it was a late implementation. Other than that, I think that's pretty much all the laws, unless Brian, you know of any other ones, but that's pretty much the only ones that impacted us for this cycle.
Any questions on that?
I was curious, in the 2 previous states we lived in, we would have people build houses on lakefront property where the property was owned by the government entity in the area. So that kind of comes across what you're talking about, correct?
Yeah,
I don't know if
good-
we do that in Wisconsin.
Yeah, so good point. So that's been another problem with this personal property is we had a lot of federal lands, tribal land,
And you would lease it.
right?
Right.
We have Home Depots that are on tribal land
Okay,
that were assessed before as personal property, buildings on leased land. There was a whole section for it, right?
right.
You know, multi-million-dollar tax bill. Well, that got put onto the tribal parcel because that's what the Department of Revenue said we're supposed to do as assessors. It was their interpretation of the law. I may have a different perspective on that, but that's what they told us to do. And so that's what happened. Tax bills went out in December and they're not being paid. Why? Because the tax bill is going to the tribe. They're tax exempt by state law automatically.
Mhm.
Federal land, state land, right? You talked about cabins that are along, you know, waterways. There's tons of those in the state. They were all being assessed as personal property. They all got added to the federal parcel. Tax bills went out. Nobody's paying them. Under state law, federal, state, school districts, they're automatically granted property tax exemption. There's no carve out for, well, a building that's owned by somebody other than the landowner being on their parcel. It's a pretty gray area. So, problem, yeah. Unintended problem they didn't necessarily think through. As removing personal property and then redefining what is and isn't real property, caused some problems.
The municipality ends up in a situation where suddenly property they may have been receiving tax benefit from disappears.
Not necessarily disappears, because you think of the tower exemption thing, right? It used to be personal property. We assessed it on a Village of Germantown parcel because that's where the tower lived.
Right.
Right? The village got a tax bill. They could have chose to pay it, or they could choose to pass it to the person leasing the land, right? And most of the cases, that's what happened, and somebody paid it. They could have said no, but uh, if now this year, when the tax tower came off, I report that as a shift to exemption. And so then it comes off of the equalized value. And the village now is no longer apportioned that amount of money to other taxing entities. It does have ripple effects,
Right.
right? Because it never changes the total tax liability. or
Well,
all
I
the
didn't think in terms of, that happens before the determination of the tax rate based on the assessed value of the community. If that happens, if your scenario happens before, then they're not basing any budget on getting that tax money.
Yeah, you think of this way, like the municipalities, the taxing entities, whatever their budget was last year, they're gonna get that again this year, right?
Mhm.
How much money they draw that from impacts the tax rate. Department of Revenue's equalized value, which is established every year on August 15th, determines the percentage of the other taxing entities portion. How much does the village owe to Washington County, the school district? It's based on that value. And that value is shaped on how I report changes that occurred within the community. If I lose $50 million for an exemption, that comes off of equalized, and that might shift to the town of Addison, right? Or another community within Washington County. It's just a reapportionment of the tax burden. It doesn't change the total amount. Yeah. So it all fits together. Good question, though.
Okay. If there are no further questions, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is to the review of the 2026 assessment roll as prepared by our assessor and perform statutory duties. I'll list those statutory duties. When we are reviewing the 2020 assessment roll, we are examining the row, correct any description or calculation errors if warranted, add omitted properties if warranted, eliminate double assessed properties if warranted. So at this time, I am going to divide the assessment row so that each person can have a stack to be able to review and go through for those 4 items that we just mentioned. And at that time, when everyone is done, if you want to switch off and pass it to your neighbor. They can review your stack, and that's how we'll proceed with that if everyone's okay with that. Additionally, to keep things simple and not to separate the books that Mark has provided to us, I'm going to use the book that I have prepared. We can separate that one, but in addition to reviewing that, you're also going to review the 2026 changed row. So these are all the changes that were made, I assume, correct me if I am wrong, Assessor Brown, at Open Book and,
Yeah, so that's when I mentioned earlier, 402 changes made.
Mhm.
So this would be a roll of just the parcels that we changed in value and sent a notice.
okay. So please keep these in the binder. We're not going to separate these. You can just pass the binder along. Sound good? Okay.
Yep, so it's posted on the village's website, and it's also posted on our associated appraisal website. If you go to the assessor's landing page on the village, that's on there. Yep. Yeah, we also posted a sales picture book for properties that sold within 25. Yep.
Board Member Edwards, do you need a little more time? Okay. So am I got a consensus to move on? Thank you. So the receipt of the 2026 assessment roll by the clerk and sworn affidavit from the assessor. That's here.
Correct.
So
I just need to sign it.
just need to sign it as a sworn affidavit. So that's before we do the correction, correct? Or should I do it in the other order? Okay. So our assessor for the record is signing and doing the sworn affidavit of the 2026 assessment row. So I will note for the record that the assessor affidavit pursuant to section 70.49 of Wisconsin statute has in fact been signed on this 4th day of June 2026 by Mark Brown, the assessor, with Associated Appraisals, and me as the clerk, Donna Ott. So now at this time, we will move on to the next item, which is discussion and action to certify all corrections of error under the state law.
So for 2026, we do have one corrections of errors that, as a board, you need to review and approve under a roll call vote. And so we had a property, I was made aware in December of 25, after the tax bills got mailed out, that a property had a fire in calendar year 24 in December. And so as of the effective date of the assessment last year, technically the assessment should have been adjusted, right? No, we weren't aware of it. There was no permits issued that we were aware of. And so there is a corrections of errors by the assessors under 7043 that's allowable. You can go back up to 1 year to correct an error in this situation. And so the property is GTNV 232103, located at North 116 West 1504 Brownstone Court. And the assessment that they got a tax bill on was 429,000. Had I known about the error or the fire that would have occurred, I would have adjusted the assessment by about $200,000. And that would have put the assessment at a corrected value of $229,000. And so they are eligible for a refund of the taxes they paid in the amount of $2,735.93. And so based on that, I would ask, as the board review, you have the authority to grant that there was a correction of errors and that they would be issued a refund at some point after this meeting. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
So that is 429.
The original assessment is 429,000. The corrected value is 229,000. And so based on the difference, they're eligible for a refund for the overpayment of taxes.
Saw that in my packet here. That's the Yatachek property.
Correct.
And I could have swore it was 409.
The assessment was 429. The estimated fair market value might have been different, but the actual assessment amount was 429,000 on the tax bill.
I think you explained this in the beginning, but was there any due diligence for the owner to notify the village?
The owner contacted the village once tax bills went out,
Okay.
and then the treasurer contacted me, and then this process started. Yeah.
So I will be looking for a motion to approve the correction of error for that property GTN 232103 Brownstone Court with the refund amount of $2,735.93. Do I have a motion? This time we'll do a roll call vote. Tim Edwards,
Aye.
Bill Shadid, Christine Huber, Chris Niggemeyer, Sam Schneider, Kim Lukert.
I
Let the record reflect that there are no objections.
And just for the record, we had no omitted property that had to be addressed in this assessment roll, so.
Do,
We had no omitted properties. We only had the one corrections of errors and no omitted properties.
do we still get the annual Walmart objection or?
So as of last year, they no longer have contested the value, and that continued again for this year.
Oh, nice.
Okay, then the next item is the discussion and action to verify with the assessor that open book changes are included in the assessment row presented.
Yes, we have made all the changes as a result of open book and mailed out notices of changed assessments within the statutory timeframe for those people, and they are all reflective in the roll.
At this time, if we were to have any taxpayers here present, they would have the opportunity, just as they did for the time that I previously stated at the beginning of the meeting, that the tax row was open for public inspection, as also what was mentioned by our assessor is that it's been available on both their websites and our website here for in Germantown. If they didn't want to come to the counter at the clerk's office, we do have and have had that accessible on our website for taxpayers to examine. I will just note for the record here that we do not have anyone in the audience requesting or wishing to review that data. Now, the next item on the agenda, during the first 2 hours, we would have, the board would have consideration of the following, which are waivers of the required 48-hour notice of intent to file an objection. We are here until 12 o'clock PM. The time is currently 11:20 a.m. So if one were to come in, then as mentioned earlier in this discussion by your chairperson and by the assessor, if for good cause, we would schedule that to another date. Request for Board of Review hearing waiver to allow the property owner, its representative or agent an appeal directly to circuit court. The request for sworn telephone testimony and sworn written testimony. We did not receive any applications for either of those. Subpoena request. You don't have any subpoena requests, do you, Assessor Brown? And then action on any other legally allowed or required Board of Review matters. So I think that's a good place for us just continue reviewing the materials in front of us, giving anyone the opportunity for this first 2-hour meeting, should they come in before we proceed with the rest of the agenda, if that's okay, Assessor Brown? Okay. Tortilla chips. So while we're waiting to see if anybody comes in, and since you guys had the row reviewed, not everyone took the training this year, but I thought that to pass time, we could do the exam, just fun. Nobody's being scored. I do have some chocolate, you know, if we decide if you got the most answers correct. But this is just for fun and just to keep us up to date and on our toes as it relates to the Board of Review. So I would appreciate your participation and we can just kind of pass time if that's okay. So again, the members that took the training this year were Sam Schneider and Chris and myself. The test or the exam that was included in the 2026 Board of Review manual and training starts with questions 1 and it goes through questions 12. So I thought we could do this, and then if you have further questions or questioned yourself or didn't know that, you would now leave more educated on it. First question, if a Board of Review member took training on May 5th of 2025 and the 2026 Board of Review is held on May 8th of 2026, did they meet the training requirement, true or false? Anyone? False. Because they took training in 25 and we have to have training, one person take training every year in that year. The meeting wasn't scheduled until 2026. Next question, when the Board of Review determines the assessor's valuation to be incorrect, it determines a new value as follows, and you have to select one. Is it A, it establishes a value between the assessor's value and the objector's value? B, established an assessed value based on the objector's objection form, supported by the sworn testimony provided by the objector and their witness and documents. Or C, establish a value that the Board of Review members thinks is correct.
Quickly, I know the purpose of this, but is this on record? And my only question is, I don't want the audience, if there is one, to assume that if we're giving wrong answers, or you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
With the confidence level and stuff like that. I
Yeah,
mean, I think it's okay if we take it.
sure.
Shells and
yeah.
then-
That's fair. Absolutely. No, I think that's fair. That's a good call. Stop by my office and sign all the documents.
It's all down there.
Okay, at this time, we'll move on to the remainder part of our, remaining part of our agenda. We have just a few minutes left here, 11:54, and I just want to make an announcement for the record that there is no one in the audience requesting waivers or consideration. There are no notices of intent to review. Next item would be proceed to hear any objections if we were to have anyone to come in. We would have a consideration by the board of the assessor subpoenas as needed. Our assessor has stated that there are none. We would have discussion and action on scheduling additional Board of Review meeting dates if needed. We still have about 5 minutes to make that determination on if we need to do a scheduled out meeting. And the discussion and action to approve the 2026 assessment row as corrected by the error. If corrections were made, and as noted earlier, there was a correction made, correct, Assessor? So we would do the discussion and action to approve the 2026 assessment row as corrected. So I will look for a motion to approve the 2026 assessment row as corrected.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. If you can just please pass back down to me the ones that were corrected in that binder, that would be great. So this was just the extra copy, correct?
That one is the official roll.
Well, this one's the one signed.
Yep, it's a two-part
Oh,
book.
It's
It's too
binder one
big.
and binder two because there's too many properties.
Yeah,
So we only need the certification page and affidavit in page one.
correct.
Perfect. A couple minutes left here and then we could do our adjournment. Okay, the time is now 12 o'clock PM, and that will conclude our 2-hour mandatory Board of Review meeting. At this time, I will entertain a motion to adjourn at 12 o'clock.